The third week at Fort Benning started like any other. Sarah Martinez stood at attention in the pre-dawn darkness, her rifle gleaming from hours of maintenance the night before. She'd learned quickly that excellence was her only armor in a place where some men still believed women didn't belong. Staff Sergeant Derek Rawlins circled the formation like a predator, his boots crunching on gravel, his eyes searching for imperfection. He stopped in front of her. "Martinez," his voice dripped with mock sweetness, "let's see that weapon." Sarah handed over her M4, confident in her preparation. Rawlins inspected it with exaggerated slowness, then suddenly fumbled it. The rifle tumbled into the red Georgia mud with a sickening splash. Gasps rippled through the formation. "Clumsy," Rawlins said, his eyes dead cold. "Just like a woman, drop and give me 50 for improper weapons maintenance." Sarah's jaw clenched. The rifle had been perfect, everyone knew it, but challenging a sergeant publicly meant insubordination. She dropped to the push-up position, her hands sinking into the same mud that coated her rifle. As she pumped out repetitions, she heard Rawlins chuckle and walk away. Private Marcus Chen, standing 3 soldiers down, caught her eye. His expression said everything. This isn't right. That night, Sarah sat in the barracks common room with her laptop, carefully documenting the incident. Date, time, witnesses, exact words spoken. It was her third report in as many weeks. The first had detailed Rawlins' comment during PT that women slow down the whole platoon. The second described how he'd reassigned her from a leadership exercise to cleaning duties despite her high performance scores. She attached the documents to an email addressed to Captain James Morrison, the company commander, and hit send. The response came 2 days later. "Received. We'll look into it. Remember, unit cohesion is paramount." Unit cohesion. The words burned in Sarah's mind. What about justice? What about accountability? Week 5 brought a new level of psychological warfare. Sarah had scored expert on the rifle range, the highest classification possible. Her groupings were tighter than anyone's in the company, including most of the instructors. The range officer had smiled, impressed, and marked her scorecard personally. By evening formation, assignments were posted for the next day's training rotations. Sarah's name appeared under latrine detail and facility maintenance. Marcus found her staring at the board, her fists trembling. "This is garbage, Sarah. You just qualified expert. You should be helping with marksmanship instruction." "It's Rawlins," she said quietly. "He controls the duty roster this week." "Then report him again." "I have 3 times now. Morrison says he's monitoring the situation." Her voice dripped with frustration. "How much monitoring does it take?" Marcus glanced around, then lowered his voice. "You're not the first. Last year, 3 women transferred out of this company. All of them cited Rawlins. Word is, complaints get filed and then disappear. There's a corporal in admin who says the company XO has a special drawer for sensitive personnel issues." Sarah's blood ran cold. A cover-up, institutional protection for a bully with rank. She spent the next week scrubbing toilets while her peers advanced their tactical training. Each night, she trained in the gym, channeling her rage into precision strikes against heavy bags. Her martial arts background, 3 national championships in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai, had attracted attention during recruitment. The Army wanted fighters, but apparently some sergeants wanted fighters who knew their place. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in the mess hall. Sarah had just finished a brutal 12-hour day of manual labor. Her uniform was stained with cleaning chemicals and sweat. She grabbed a tray, loaded it with the standard meal, mystery meat, potatoes, green beans, and turned to find a seat. The mess hall buzzed with the usual chaos of 200 hungry soldiers. She didn't see Rawlins approach from her blind side. His hand shot out and grabbed her tray from below, tipping it violently upward. Food exploded across Sarah's chest and face, hot gravy soaking into her uniform. The mess hall fell silent. Every eye turned toward the commotion. "Oops," Rawlins announced loudly, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. Guess women can't handle combat or carry their own food. Maybe you should stick to typing, Martinez. Less chance of getting hurt. Laughter erupted from a table of Rawlins' cronies, sergeants who'd served with him for years, who shared his outdated views. But Sarah noticed something else. Most of the soldiers weren't laughing. They were watching with uncomfortable expressions, some shaking their heads, others looking down at their trays in shame. Sarah stood absolutely still, mashed potatoes sliding down her uniform jacket. Every instinct screamed at her to strike, to use the skills she'd honed over a decade of martial arts training. She could visualize exactly how it would go. Sweep his lead leg, control his fall armbar submission in under 3 seconds. But that's what he wanted, a reaction, evidence that women were too emotional for military service. Instead, she met his eyes with ice-cold calm. "Yes, Sergeant," she said clearly. Then she walked to the cleaning station, grabbed towels and methodically cleaned herself while the entire mess hall watched in stunned silence. Marcus found her outside 10 minutes later, sitting on a bench in the darkness. "That was the most disciplined thing I've ever seen," he said, sitting beside her. "I wanted to punch him myself." "He's trying to make me quit," Sarah said, "or react. Either way, he wins." "Not necessarily." Marcus pulled out his phone, showing her a calendar. "Battalion formation review is tomorrow. 500 soldiers visiting brass, the whole show. Everyone will be there, including the base commander. Rawlins will be on his best behavior with that many eyes watching." Sarah looked at the date, then at Marcus. "Or he'll see it as his last chance to humiliate me before I get recognition." "Maybe, but Sarah," Marcus's voice grew serious. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you've got witnesses, 500 of them. He can't make that disappear." That night, Sarah cleaned her dress uniform with meticulous care. She polished her boots until they reflected like mirrors. She rehearsed every drill movement until her body moved with mechanical precision. And she made a decision. Tomorrow she would stand tall. Tomorrow she would accept whatever commendation she'd earned. And tomorrow, if Derek Rawlins wanted a confrontation in front of 500 soldiers, she would be ready. She just didn't know how ready she'd have to be. The parade ground at Fort Benning stretched like a massive concrete ocean under the October sun. Sarah Martinez stood in formation, one soldier among 500, her dress uniform crisp and perfect. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and anticipation. This was the quarterly battalion review, a ceremony steeped in military tradition, where excellence was recognized and careers were shaped. Bleachers lined the eastern edge of the parade ground, filled with family members, local officials, and visiting officers from the Pentagon. A brass band played martial music from their position near the reviewing stand. Behind them, enormous American flags snapped in the autumn breeze. Sarah's heart hammered beneath her ribbons, but her face remained neutral, eyes fixed forward. Staff Sergeant Derek Rawlins stood 3 rows behind her, positioned with the other senior NCOs. She could feel his presence like a cold spot in warm sunshine. This morning, he'd walked past her during pre-ceremony inspection and whispered just loud enough for her to hear. "Enjoy your last formation, Martinez." The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, took the podium. Her voice carried across the formation through the PA system. "Today, we recognize soldiers who exemplify the Army values of loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage." Sarah's mind drifted briefly to the night before. She'd called her father, retired Marine Gunnery Sergeant Roberto Martinez, to tell him about the commendation she'd be receiving. His voice had swelled with pride. "You earned it, Mija. Don't let anyone tell you different." She wondered what he'd say if he knew about Rawlins, about the harassment she'd endured for weeks. But she'd kept that part hidden, not wanting to worry him. Private First Class Sarah Martinez, front and center. The words jolted her back to the present. This was it. Sarah executed a perfect about-face, then marched with measured precision across the parade ground. Her boots struck the pavement in rhythmic cadence. 500 soldiers watched. The families in the bleachers craned their necks to see. Somewhere, a camera clicked repeatedly. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes smiled as Sarah rendered a sharp salute. Private Martinez has achieved the highest combined scores in combat training, physical fitness, marksmanship, and tactical exercises in this training cycle. Her dedication represents the finest traditions of the United States Army. The certificate felt weightless in Sarah's hands, but the moment felt heavy with significance. This was why she'd enlisted, to prove herself, to serve, to be excellent. As she saluted again and executed an about-face, she caught sight of Marcus Chen in formation. He nodded slightly, a gesture of respect and friendship. The walk back to her position felt longer than the walk out. Each step brought her closer to Rawlins' position. She could see him now, standing rigid in the NCO formation, his face an unreadable mask. Sarah slipped back into her spot in formation, holding the certificate carefully, her eyes returning to the front. That's when she heard it. Rawlins' voice, low and venomous, carried just far enough to reach her ears. Sleeping with the scoring officer, Martinez. That's the only way trash like you gets recognized. The words hit her like a physical blow. Sarah's jaw clenched, every muscle in her body tensed. For 5 weeks, she'd endured his abuse in silence, through proper channels with discipline and restraint. But this, questioning her integrity, her honor in front of the entire battalion, this was different. She turned her head slightly, breaking formation protocol. "I earned this, Sergeant." Her voice was calm but firm, carrying just enough volume that the soldiers immediately around them heard clearly. Several heads turned. The atmosphere shifted, charged with sudden tension. Rawlins' face transformed. The mask of military discipline cracked, revealing pure rage underneath. He stepped out of formation, violating every protocol in the book, his boots heavy on the concrete. Officers at the reviewing stand were still occupied with the ceremony, oblivious to the drama unfolding 30 yards away. "Know your place," Rawlins roared. The sound cut across the parade ground like a thunderclap. The band stopped playing mid-note. Conversations died instantly. 500 soldiers turned as one organism to witness what happened next. Rawlins' hand came up fast, an open palm strike aimed at Sarah's face with 15 years of muscle behind it. The slap connected with her left cheek with a crack that echoed off the building facades surrounding the parade ground. Sarah's head snapped to the side. The certificate fell from her hands, fluttering to the ground. Time seemed to fracture and slow. Sarah tasted blood. Her cheek burned. But more than physical pain, she felt something else. A decade of martial arts training awakening every nerve in her body. Her vision sharpened. Her breathing steadied. She saw Rawlins drawing back his right hand for another strike, saw the twisted satisfaction in his eyes, saw the exact trajectory his fist would follow. And she moved. Rawlins' second punch came fast, but Sarah was faster. Her left hand swept up in a fluid arc, intercepting his wrist mid-strike. Her right hand clamped onto his hand, fingers finding the exact pressure points she'd practiced 10,000 times on training mats. In one explosive motion, she rotated her entire body, using Rawlins' forward momentum against him. The joint lock was textbook perfect, mechanical precise. The first wrist broke with a sound like a dry branch snapping, a sharp crack that made people in the bleachers gasp. Rawlins' eyes went wide with shock and pain, but Sarah wasn't finished. As he began to crumple, his other hand instinctively reached for her. She caught it with equal precision, applied the same devastating technique. Crack! The second wrist shattered. Rawlins screamed, a raw, animal sound of agony that silenced even the birds. He dropped to his knees on the parade ground, both hands hanging at grotesque angles, his face contorted in pain and disbelief. Sarah stood above him, her chest heaving, her hands still raised in a defensive posture. Complete silence blanketed the formation. 500 soldiers stood frozen, minds struggling to process what they'd just witnessed. In the bleachers, a woman's hand covered her mouth in shock. At the reviewing stand, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes was already moving, barking orders into her radio. MPs stationed around the perimeter began running toward the scene. Sarah looked down at Rawlins, who was now sobbing, cradling his ruined wrists against his chest. She felt no satisfaction, no triumph, only a cold, hollow certainty that her life had just changed forever. Her dress uniform was still perfect, not a wrinkle out of place. The certificate lay on the ground between them, her name clearly visible in formal script. Private Marcus Chen broke formation first, stepping forward instinctively, but a captain's sharp command froze him in place. Nobody move, everyone hold position. The MPs arrived within 90 seconds, their boots pounding on concrete. The senior MP, a staff sergeant with 20 years of experience, took one look at the scene and immediately reached for his handcuffs. He approached Sarah cautiously, as if she might be dangerous. "Private Martinez, I need you to put your hands behind your back," he said, his voice professional but wary. Sarah complied without resistance, her movements slow and deliberate. The metal cuffs clicked around her wrists, the same wrists that had just broken bones with surgical precision. As the MP began reading her rights, Sarah caught sight of something that gave her a flicker of hope. Private Chen had his phone out, recording. So did at least a dozen other soldiers, their devices pointed at the scene from multiple angles. Whatever happened next, whatever charges she faced, the truth had been captured. 500 witnesses had seen exactly how it started. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes arrived, her face grave. She looked at Rawlins, still writhing on the ground, then at Sarah standing calmly in handcuffs, then at the certificate lying forgotten on the pavement. "Get Sergeant Rawlins to the hospital immediately," she ordered. "And someone pick up that certificate. Private Martinez earned it." As the MPs led Sarah away, she heard Rawlins screaming between sobs, "I'll end your career. You're finished, finished." But Sarah knew the truth that Rawlins hadn't yet grasped. It wasn't her career that had ended on that parade ground. It was his. The holding cell was exactly 8 feet by 10 feet. Sarah knew because she'd paced it 17 times in the first hour. Cinder block walls painted institutional beige, a metal bench bolted to the floor, fluorescent lights that hummed with electrical persistence. The MP had been professional when processing her, fingerprints, photographs, property inventory. Her commendation certificate had been logged into evidence along with her phone, wallet, and the small cross necklace her grandmother had given her before basic training. Now she sat alone with only the sound of her own breathing and the distant voices of MPs conducting their shift change. Sarah's left cheek throbbed where Rawlins had struck her. She could feel it swelling, the skin tight and hot. Her hands, still steady despite everything, showed no marks. That's what years of proper training did. You learn to break bones without damaging yourself. The thought should have brought satisfaction, but instead she felt only a creeping dread. She'd assaulted a superior officer, in front of 500 witnesses, during an official ceremony. The Uniform Code of Military Justice had clear provisions for such actions: court-martial, dishonorable discharge, possibly even prison time. Self-defense was a legal argument, but would it matter? How many soldiers had tried that defense and failed? The door buzzed and swung open. Captain James Morrison entered, his expression unreadable. He changed out of his dress uniform into standard ACUs. Sarah stood immediately, coming to attention despite the absence of protocol requirements in a holding cell. "Sit down, Martinez," Morrison said, his voice carefully neutral. He remained standing, maintaining the physical authority of rank. "I'm here to inform you that you're being held pending investigation by Army CID. You'll be appointed a military defense attorney within 24 hours. Yes, sir. Morrison studied her for a long moment. Did he strike you first? Yes, sir. And you broke both his wrists? Yes, sir. He attempted to strike me a second time. I defended myself using appropriate force to neutralize the threat. Something flickered in Morrison's eyes. Was it approval? Concern? He glanced toward the door, ensuring privacy, then lowered his voice slightly. There are 17 videos so far. More are surfacing every hour. Every single one shows the same sequence of events. Rollins struck first. Sarah's heart leaped. Sir, Morrison held up a hand. Don't say anything else. Not to me, not to anyone except your attorney. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Your phone has been ringing continuously since we confiscated it. Your father is en route from Texas. He should arrive by morning. Morrison moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Martinez, I wish I'd acted sooner on your reports. That's my failure, and I'll have to answer for it. The door closed behind him with a heavy metallic thunk. 300 miles away, in a Houston suburb, Roberto Martinez's truck roared through the night. The retired Marine's hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, his phone on speaker as his wife Maria read him news updates from the passenger seat. It's everywhere, Roberto. Twitter, Facebook, the news. Someone posted #KnowYourPlace and it's trending nationwide. Read me exactly what it says. Maria's voice trembled as she read from her phone screen. Female soldier reportedly assaults superior officer during military ceremony at Fort Benning. Witnesses claim the sergeant struck first. Multiple videos circulating on social media. Story developing. Roberto's jaw clenched. Our daughter doesn't assault people, she defends herself. There's a difference. He taught Sarah everything he knew about discipline, honor, and standing your ground. When she was 12 and a bully twice her size had pushed her at school, Roberto had enrolled her in martial arts. Never start a fight, he told her, but always finish one. Now his daughter sat in a military holding cell, and every instinct screamed at him to protect her. The truck's speedometer crept past 80. At Fort Benning's base hospital, Staff Sergeant Derek Rollins lay in a bed with both arms in temporary splints, waiting for orthopedic surgery scheduled for the morning. The morphine dulled the pain but not his rage. A nurse adjusted his IV while a young MP stood guard outside his room. I want to press charges, Rollins slurred through the medication. Full charges, assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. She attacked me. The CID investigators will take your statement tomorrow, Sergeant, the nurse said neutrally. I'm the victim here, Rollins' voice rose. That woman attacked a superior officer. She belongs in Leavenworth. The nurse said nothing, but her expression spoke volumes. She'd already seen the videos. Half the base had seen them. The nurse finished her checks and left Rollins alone with his morphine and his fury. What Rollins didn't know, what he wouldn't discover until the next morning, was that his hospital room was 3 doors down from where Private Jessica Torres was being treated for anxiety. Torres, who had served under Rollins 2 years prior. Torres, who had filed a harassment complaint that mysteriously disappeared. Torres, who was now on the phone with an Army CID special agent, her hands shaking as she finally told the truth about what Rollins had done to her. The videos spread like wildfire across social media. By midnight, the highest quality version had been viewed 3 million times. Posted by an anonymous soldier's personal account, it showed everything with crystal clarity. Rollins leaving formation, the verbal confrontation, the slap, Sarah's defensive response, the sickening crack of breaking bone. The comment section exploded. She gave him exactly what he deserved. That's what happens when you underestimate a trained fighter. Self-defense, clear as day, free her. Women have every right to serve and defend themselves. But not all comments were supportive. She assaulted a superior officer. Doesn't matter who started it. Excessive force, she could have just blocked him. This is why women don't belong in combat roles, too emotional. The debate raged across every platform. Cable news picked up the story for their morning broadcasts. Military justice experts were already being booked for commentary slots. Retired generals began weighing in with opinions. The phrase, "know your place," transformed from an insult into a rallying cry. Know Your Place trended #1 worldwide by 2 a.m. In the holding cell, Sarah had no knowledge of the firestorm outside. She lay on the metal bench, using her uniform jacket as a pillow, and tried to sleep. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the moment again. Rollins' hand coming toward her face, the choice she'd made in a fraction of a second, the sound of breaking bone. She'd spent 5 years earning her black belts. Thousands of hours on training mats, learning control, learning restraint, learning exactly how much force to apply for specific results. Her instructors had drilled one principle into her mind. Martial arts were for defense only, a last resort when all other options failed. Had she used excessive force? Could she have simply blocked him and walked away? The questions circled in her mind like vultures. At 3 a.m., she finally drifted into fitful sleep, unaware that investigators were already pulling files, that witnesses were being interviewed, that her story was becoming national news. Sarah Martinez had wanted only to serve her country with honor. Instead, she'd become the center of a national conversation about power, gender, justice, and what it really meant to know your place. The fight on the parade ground had lasted less than 5 seconds. The fight for her future was just beginning. Special Agent Maria Torres of Army CID arrived at Fort Benning at 600 hours, 30 minutes before sunrise. She'd driven through the night from Fort Stewart, her coffee thermos empty, her mind already cataloging the questions that needed answers. The Martinez-Rollins incident had all the hallmarks of a case that could either vindicate or destroy careers, possibly both simultaneously. Her first stop was the evidence locker, where she collected Sarah's confiscated phone. The device had logged 247 missed calls, 891 text messages, and countless social media notifications. Torres scrolled through with practiced efficiency, documenting everything. Sarah's father had called 63 times. Friends from her martial arts academy in California had flooded her messages with support. But there was something else. Emails to Captain Morrison, each one meticulously detailing incidents of harassment. Torres photographed every email. This was evidence of a pattern. By 800 hours, she'd assembled a team in a borrowed conference room. Sergeant First Class Kevin Holder, a 20-year CID veteran, spread 18 printed screenshots across the table, each one a different angle of the parade ground incident captured on soldiers' phones. Angle 1 through 6 show the initial confrontation, Holder explained, pointing to each image in sequence. Rollins leaves formation here, approaches Martinez here. You can see him shouting. Angles 7 through 12 capture the strike clear, unobstructed view of Rollins' hand making contact with Martinez's face. Torres leaned closer. In the high-resolution images, you could see the exact moment of impact, Sarah's head snapping sideways, the certificate falling from her hands. And the response, Torres asked. Holder pulled up the next sequence. Angles 13 through 18 show Martinez's defensive action. Watch closely, she doesn't strike him. She intercepts his second attack and applies joint locks. It's textbook defensive technique, not offensive assault. Torres watched the sequence 3 times. Sarah's movements were economical, precise, almost graceful. There was no anger in her body language, no excess force, just pure mechanical efficiency. Get me every witness statement by 1200 hours, Torres ordered. And I want Rollins' complete service record, every fitness report, every assignment, every complaint filed against him. Ma'am, Holder hesitated. About those complaints, we might have a problem. At 9:45 hours, Private Marcus Chen sat across from Torres in an interview room. his hands folded on the table. He'd volunteered to testify before Torres even requested his presence. "Tell me about Staff Sergeant Rawlins' treatment of female soldiers," Torres said, her recorder running. Marcus took a deep breath. "It's been going on for years. I've only been here 6 months, but other soldiers talk. Last year, 3 women transferred out of our company. All of them cited Rawlins in their exit interviews. One of them, Private Jessica Torres, told me Rawlins cornered her in the supply room and made explicit comments about her body. When she reported it, nothing happened." Torres' pen stopped mid-stroke. "Did you say Jessica Torres?" "Yes, ma'am. She's stationed in Korea now, I think." Torres made a note. "Continue." "With Private Martinez, it escalated over 5 weeks. First it was comments, women don't belong in combat, that kind of thing. Then it got physical. He'd accidentally knock her equipment into mud, assign her to the worst details despite top performance. We all saw it happening." "Did anyone report this?" Marcus's face darkened. "Martinez reported it 3 times to Captain Morrison. Nothing changed. The rumor is that complaints about Rawlins get filed in a drawer somewhere and never see daylight." Torres closed her notebook. "Private Chen, thank you for your honesty. You may be called to testify formally." As Marcus left, Torres turned to Holder. "Find me Jessica Torres and locate that drawer." By 1300 hours, Torres had Jessica Torres on a video call from Camp Humphreys in South Korea. The young soldier's hands trembled as she recounted her experience with Rawlins 2 years prior. "He waited until I was alone in the supply room," Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He told me that if I wanted good assignments, I needed to be friendlier with senior NCOs. When I told him no, he grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises. I wore long sleeves for a week." "What happened when you reported it?" Torres asked gently. "I filed a formal complaint with the company executive officer. He told me he'd investigate. 2 weeks later, he called me into his office and said there wasn't enough evidence to proceed. He suggested I was misinterpreting friendly mentorship. A month later, I requested a transfer to Korea just to get away from Fort Benning." Torres' jaw tightened. "Would you be willing to testify about this?" Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but her voice strengthened. "Yes. If it means Rawlins can't do this to anyone else, yes." After the call ended, Torres sat in silence for a moment. Then she stood and walked directly to the company administrative offices, where Captain Morrison was waiting with a locked file drawer. "I found it yesterday," Morrison admitted, his face ashen. "After you called requesting Rawlins' personnel file, I started looking. This was in the XO's desk. He retired 3 months ago." Torres snapped on latex gloves and opened the drawer. Inside were 47 manila folders, each one labeled with a soldier's name and date. She pulled the first file, a harassment complaint from 2019, then another from 2020, and another. 47 complaints spanning 6 years, all nomming Derek Rawlins. None of them had been officially processed. None had reached the appropriate chain of command. "Jesus Christ," Holder muttered, photographing each document. Torres held up one complaint form, her hands shaking with controlled fury. "This soldier reported sexual harassment. This one reported physical intimidation. This one," her voice caught, "this one reported assault. All buried, all ignored." Morrison stood rigid, his face pale. "I swear I never knew about this drawer if I had." "Save it for your own investigation, Captain," Torres cut him off. "Right now, you need to tell me every officer who had access to that desk." By evening, the story broke nationwide. A leaked photograph of the drawer full of complaint files appeared on Twitter, posted by an anonymous source. Within an hour, major news networks were leading with the headline, "Army Cover-Up. Dozens of harassment complaints against Fort Benning Sergeant allegedly buried." The Pentagon issued a terse statement promising a full investigation. Fort Benning's base commander faced a barrage of media questions outside the headquarters building. Protesters began gathering at the main gate, holding signs, "Justice for Sarah" and "No more cover-ups." Sarah, still in the holding cell, knew nothing of the growing maelstrom. But at 1900 hours, Major Linda Chen arrived, a JAG officer with 15 years of experience and a reputation for fearlessness. She carried a briefcase full of evidence and wore an expression of grim determination. "Private Martinez," Chen said, sitting across from Sarah in the interview room. "My name is Major Chen. I've been appointed as your defense attorney. Before we begin, I need you to understand something. This case is no longer just about you. It's become about every woman who's ever been silenced, every complaint that was ignored, every soldier who was told to maintain unit cohesion instead of demanding justice." Sarah met her eyes. "I just defended myself." "I know, and I'm going to make sure everyone else knows it too." Chen opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "We have 18 videos showing Rollins struck first. We have your documented complaints to Captain Morrison. We have testimony from Private Chen and 3 other witnesses. And as of this afternoon, we have 47 buried harassment complaints nomming Rollins, including testimony from 4 women willing to come forward publicly." Sarah's eyes widened. 4 women. Jessica Torres from Korea, Rachel Washington from Germany, and 2 soldiers currently stationed here who have been afraid to speak until now. Chen leaned forward. "Private Martinez, Staff Sergeant Rollins is finished. The only question now is whether the Army tries to sacrifice you to save face, or whether they do the right thing." "What do I need to do?" Chen smiled grimly. "Tell the truth, all of it, and let me handle the rest." Outside the holding facility, news vans lined the street. Reporters shouted questions at every officer who passed. Social media buzzed with "Know Your Place" and "Justice for Sarah." The story had transcended one incident on a parade ground. It had become a reckoning. The courtroom at Fort Benning was designed for military precision, not comfort. Wooden benches lined both sides of the aisle, separated by a central walkway that led to the judge's bench. The seal of the United States Army hung prominently on the wall behind the military judge, Colonel Robert Henshaw, a stern man with 32 years of service and a reputation for running tight proceedings. It was November 3rd, exactly 3 weeks after the parade ground incident. The courtroom had reached maximum capacity an hour before the scheduled start time. Media representatives occupied the back rows, their notebooks ready, cameras forbidden inside. Sarah's father, Roberto Martinez, sat in the front row behind the defense table, his Marine Corps dress blues pristine despite his retirement. Beside him sat Sarah's mother, Maria, her rosary beads clutched tightly in her hands. Sarah entered wearing her dress uniform, every ribbon in perfect placement, her posture military straight despite the weight of what was coming. Major Linda Chen walked beside her, carrying 2 thick accordion folders stuffed with evidence. They took their seats at the defense table as whispers rippled through the gallery. Across the aisle, Staff Sergeant Derek Rollins sat with his attorney, a captain named Douglas Brenner who'd drawn the unenviable task of defending the indefensible. Rollins' wrists were still in light braces. The bones had healed poorly, requiring additional surgery. His face was drawn, harder than before, his eyes fixed on Sarah with undisguised hatred. This was actually 2 separate courts-martial happening simultaneously, an unusual but necessary procedure. Sarah faced charges of assault on a superior commissioned officer. Rollins faced assault, conduct unbecoming, and after the investigation revealed the buried complaints, additional charges of sexual harassment and abuse of authority. Colonel Henshaw's gavel struck sharply. "This court-martial is now in session. Let the record show all parties are present." The prosecution went first in Sarah's case. Captain James Mitchell, a prosecutor with a reputation for aggressive tactics, stood and buttoned his jacket. "Your Honor, the facts are simple," Mitchell began. "Private Martinez, regardless of provocation, assaulted Staff Sergeant Rawlins with such force that she broke both of his wrists. While we acknowledge that Sergeant Rawlins struck first, the defendant's response was grossly disproportionate to the threat. A trained martial artist with her skills could have simply restrained Sergeant Rawlins without causing permanent injury. Mitchell played one of the videos, the footage now familiar to everyone in the courtroom. The slap, Sarah's lightning-fast response, the sickening crack of breaking bone, amplified through the courtroom speakers. The prosecution will demonstrate that Private Martinez's actions went beyond self-defense into the realm of retribution. We ask that she be found guilty of assault and receive appropriate punishment under the UCMJ. Mitchell sat down, satisfied. Major Chen stood slowly, commanding the room's attention before she spoke a word. She approached the prosecution's video display and replayed the footage, this time in slow motion. Ladies and gentlemen of the panel, let's examine what actually happened here. Chen froze the frame showing Rawlins' first strike. Staff Sergeant Rawlins, a 15-year veteran with significant size and strength advantage, struck Private Martinez with sufficient force to cause visible injury. Look at her head snap back. Look at the immediate swelling on her cheek. She advanced the footage frame by frame. Now watch carefully. Sergeant Rawlins immediately draws back his right fist for a second strike, a closed fist this time, not an open palm. Private Martinez has approximately 0.4 seconds to respond to a superior officer attacking her during a formal military ceremony. Chen turned to face the panel of officers who would decide Sarah's fate. Private Martinez is a degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and a second-degree black belt in Muay Thai. If she wanted to hurt Sergeant Rawlins, truly hurt him, she could have struck his throat, his temple, his solar plexus. She could have rendered him unconscious in under 2 seconds. Instead, she used joint manipulation techniques specifically designed to neutralize an attacker with minimal injury. Minimal, Mitchell interjected. Both wrists were broken. And he's expected to make a full recovery, Chen countered sharply. Unlike the psychological damage he inflicted on multiple female soldiers over 6 years of harassment, which brings us to context. Chen nodded to her assistant, who wheeled in a large evidence board covered with documents. These are 47 harassment complaints filed against Sergeant Rawlins between 2019 and 2025. 47 soldiers, 43 of them women, reported his behavior through proper channels. Not one of these complaints was appropriately investigated. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Colonel Henshaw gavelled for silence. Private Martinez herself filed 3 formal complaints in the 5 weeks before this incident, Chen continued. She followed every proper channel. She demonstrated remarkable restraint in the face of systematic harassment, discrimination, and hostile work environment. On the day of the incident, after receiving a commendation for excellence that Sergeant Rawlins publicly attributed to sexual misconduct, she still attempted to disengage verbally. Only when physically attacked did she defend herself. Chen's voice rose with controlled passion. This is not a case of excessive force. This is a case of a soldier who exhausted every peaceful option and, when violently attacked, used her training to protect herself. The fact that she's skilled enough to break bones without a weapon doesn't make her response excessive. It makes her exactly the kind of disciplined warrior we want in our army. The prosecution and defense each called witnesses throughout the day. Private Marcus Chen testified about the pattern of harassment he'd witnessed. Jessica Torres appeared via video link from Korea, her testimony about Rawlins' assault leaving several panel members visibly disturbed. 3 other female soldiers bravely took the stand, each recounting similar experiences. Then came the expert testimony. Colonel Patricia Hayes, the battalion commander who'd witnessed the entire parade ground incident, took the stand in her dress, uniform heavy with ribbons from 3 deployments. I was 15 feet away when it happened, Hayes testified. I saw Sergeant Rawlins leave formation, clearly agitated. I saw him strike Private Martinez. I was moving to intervene when she defended herself. Hayes paused, looking directly at Sarah. In my 30 years of service, I've never seen a more textbook example of appropriate defensive force. She could have killed him. She chose not to. The prosecution tried to shake Hayes' testimony. "Colonel, isn't it true that Private Martinez could have simply blocked the second strike?" Hayes fixed Mitchell with a steely gaze. "Captain, when a superior officer attacks you without provocation during a formal ceremony, with 500 witnesses and your career on the line, you have milliseconds to make a decision. Private Martinez made the right one. She stopped the threat, protected herself, and used precisely the amount of force necessary. I wish I had half her restraint when I was her age." The courtroom was silent as Hayes stepped down. Sarah took the stand in the afternoon. Under Chen's questioning, she recounted every incident of harassment, every ignored complaint, every moment of restraint. Her voice never wavered, her eyes never left the panel. "Did you intend to break Sergeant Rawlins' wrists?" Chen asked. "No, ma'am. I intended to stop him from striking me again. The joint locks I applied are designed to control an opponent. The breaks occurred because Sergeant Rawlins continued to resist and pull against the locks. If he'd stopped struggling, his injuries would have been minimal." Mitchell's cross-examination was aggressive. "Private Martinez, you have extensive martial arts training. You knew these techniques could cause serious injury." "I knew they could, yes, sir. I also knew that standing still while being beaten by a superior officer could cause serious injury as well. I chose the option that protected my safety while using the least force necessary." "You weren't in fear for your life?" Sarah met his eyes calmly. "I was in fear of continued assault, sir. The law doesn't require me to wait until I'm unconscious to defend myself." Mitchell had no response. The panel deliberated for 47 minutes. When they returned, the foreman, a lieutenant colonel with combat infantry experience, stood and read the verdict in a clear voice. "On the charge of assault on a superior officer, we find the defendant, Private First Class Sarah Martinez, not guilty." Roberto Martinez's hand found his wife's, squeezing tight. Sarah's shoulders trembled slightly, but she remained at attention. The proceedings immediately shifted to Rawlins' court-martial. The evidence was overwhelming: videos, testimony, buried complaints, medical records. His defense attorney mounted a weak argument about different times and misunderstandings. The panel deliberated for 23 minutes. "On all charges, we find the defendant, Staff Sergeant Derek Rawlins, guilty." Sentencing came swiftly. Dishonorable discharge, reduction to E1, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and 18 months confinement at the United States Disciplinary Barracks, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. As the MPs escorted Rawlins from the courtroom, he turned and screamed at Sarah, "This isn't over, you hear me? This isn't." The doors closed, cutting off his voice. Sarah stood, rendered a perfect salute to Colonel Henshaw, and walked out of the courtroom a free soldier. Her father met her in the hallway, pulling her into a tight embrace as cameras flashed. "You stood your ground, Mija," he whispered. "I'm so proud." Outside, Major Chen addressed the assembled media. "Today, justice was served. But let's be clear, this case should never have reached this point. 47 complaints were ignored. The system failed. We must do better." That night, Know Your Place trended again, but with a different meaning. Not defiance against authority, but affirmation of worth. Sarah Martinez knew her place. It was standing tall. 3 days after the verdict, Sarah Martinez stood in the Pentagon's north parking entrance, security badge clipped to her Class A uniform. The November wind cut through the Virginia air as Major Linda Chen guided her through metal detectors and endless corridors of power. They were headed to a closed-door session with the Department of Defense Sexual Harassment and Assault Response Prevention Office, SHARP, a meeting that would reshape military policy for years to come. "Remember," Chen whispered as they approached the conference room, "they're not just listening to you. They're listening to every soldier who's been silenced." The conference room held 12 senior officials, generals, admirals, civilian oversight personnel, and 2 representatives from the Senate Armed Services Committee. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she took her seat at the head of the table, but her voice remained steady as she recounted her story for what felt like the 100th time. "The system is broken," Sarah concluded after 30 minutes of testimony. "I filed 3 formal complaints through proper channels. All 3 disappeared into a drawer. I followed every rule, showed maximum restraint, and still ended up in handcuffs for defending myself. If I hadn't been recorded by 17 soldiers, I'd probably be in Leavenworth right now instead of sitting here." Rear Admiral Catherine Stevens, head of Sharp, leaned forward. "Private Martinez, what would you change about the current reporting system?" Sarah didn't hesitate. Direct reporting outside the chain of command, anonymous hotlines monitored by independent investigators, mandatory quarterly audits of all harassment complaints, and real consequences for officers who bury complaints, not just a slap on the wrist, but career-ending consequences. The room fell silent. Then Senator Patricia Drummond, a former Army officer herself, spoke. "What you're describing would require a complete overhaul of how we handle misconduct reports across all branches." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied. 47 complaints were buried at just one company at Fort Benning. How many more are hidden in file drawers across every base worldwide? The system protects harassers instead of victims. That has to change. Within 2 weeks, the Department of Defense announced sweeping reforms. The Martinez Protocols, as they were unofficially named, mandated independent oversight of all harassment complaints, direct reporting channels bypassing chain of command, and quarterly reviews by inspector general teams. Fort Benning became the pilot program. Back at Fort Benning, heads rolled. Major David Kellerman, the company executive officer who'd buried the complaints in his desk drawer, faced a board of inquiry. The investigation revealed he'd deliberately concealed 47 reports to maintain unit cohesion statistics that looked good for promotion packets. He was allowed to resign in lieu of court-martial, losing his pension and veteran benefits. Captain James Morrison, who'd repeatedly told Sarah to be patient while doing nothing substantive, received a letter of reprimand that effectively ended his career advancement. But Morrison surprised everyone by requesting to stay at Fort Benning rather than transfer. "I failed Private Martinez and 46 other soldiers," he told the new battalion commander during his disciplinary hearing. "I want to spend the rest of my career making sure that never happens again." The base commander, moved by Morrison's genuine remorse and recognition that the institutional culture bore responsibility beyond any individual, approved the request. Morrison was reassigned to oversee the new harassment prevention program. He threw himself into the work with the fervor of someone seeking redemption. Morrison's first action was implementing a direct hotline to CID that bypassed all company-level officers. His second was mandatory monthly training sessions, where he personally recounted how he'd failed Sarah Martinez, using his own mistakes as a teaching tool. Officers squirmed in their seats as Morrison displayed the emails Sarah had sent, emails he'd acknowledged but never acted upon. "I told her I was monitoring the situation," Morrison said, his voice heavy with regret. "I told her to maintain patience. I prioritized paperwork and my career over a soldier's safety. Don't be me." The message resonated. Within 3 months, Fort Benning's harassment reporting increased by 340%, not because incidents increased, but because soldiers finally believed their complaints would be heard. Sarah, meanwhile, had been quietly transferred to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, home of the 101st Airborne Division. The reassignment was strategic. Give her a fresh start away from the media circus, away from the stares and whispers. On her first day at the new unit, Sarah expected awkwardness, maybe hostility from soldiers who'd seen her as a troublemaker. Instead, she found respect. Her new platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, a combat veteran with 2 Afghanistan deployments, pulled Sarah aside after morning formation. "Martinez, I read your file. I watched the videos. You did what you had to do. Here you'll be judged on your performance, nothing else. Clear." "Crystal clear, Sergeant." And Sarah performed. She threw herself into training with renewed focus, channeling months of stress into physical excellence. The Advanced Infantry Combat Training course was designed to break soldiers, 22 weeks of tactical exercises, live fire drills, airborne operations, and leadership development. Sarah excelled in every phase. Her instructors noted her tactical awareness, her ability to remain calm under pressure, her natural leadership during squad exercises. When paired with male soldiers who initially doubted her capabilities, she won them over through competence, not confrontation. During a particularly brutal field exercise, 72 hours in freezing rain conducting simulated combat operations, Sarah's squad was ambushed during a navigation course. While others panicked, Sarah immediately took charge, directing defensive positions, coordinating fire and movement, and leading her team to successfully repel the aggressor force. Her squad leader's after-action report was glowing. PFC Martinez demonstrated exceptional leadership under pressure. Recommend for promotion to specialist and consideration for leadership positions. Meanwhile, Sarah's story continued to inspire others. Letters arrived weekly from soldiers across all branches: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, each one sharing stories of harassment and thanking her for giving them courage to report. One letter came from Private Rachel Kim at Fort Hood. "I was assaulted by my squad leader 6 months ago. I never reported it because I thought no one would believe me. After seeing what you went through, I finally filed a complaint. CID investigated and he's being court-martialed next month. You saved me from suffering in silence. Thank you." Major Chen forwarded these letters to Sarah, who read each one carefully, often with tears in her eyes. This was never what she'd wanted to become: a symbol, a spokesperson. She just wanted to serve. But she was learning that sometimes service meant more than carrying a rifle. In March, Sarah was promoted to specialist. In May, she graduated Advanced Infantry Combat Training with honors, ranking 3rd in her class of 240 soldiers. Her father flew to Fort Campbell for the graduation ceremony, his chest swelling with pride as he watched his daughter receive her certificate. "How does it feel?" Roberto asked afterward. "Like I can finally breathe," Sarah admitted. "For the first time since the parade ground, I feel like a soldier again, not a headline." That evening, Sarah returned to her barracks to find an official envelope on her bunk, Fort Campbell letterhead. She opened it with steady hands. "Deployment orders. Specialist Sarah Martinez. Destination, Afghanistan. Unit 2 ND Brigade Combat Team, 101 ST Airborne Division. Departure date, August. Duration, 12 months. Sarah stared at the orders for a long moment. Afghanistan, real combat, real danger, everything she trained for. She pulled out her phone and called her father. "Dad, I'm deploying." Roberto's voice swelled with emotion. "Afghanistan." "Yes, sir, 12 months, squad leader position." There was a long pause. Then Roberto said the words that meant everything. "Your mother and I are proud of you, Mija. Go show them what a Martinez can do." Sarah smiled, holding the orders against her chest. The parade ground felt like a lifetime ago. Rawlins was behind bars. The system was changing, and she was finally doing what she'd always wanted. Serving her country. On her own terms. 2 years later, the morning sun broke over Fort Campbell as Sergeant Sarah Martinez walked across the training grounds, her boots crunching on frost-covered grass. The chevrons on her sleeves still felt new, though she'd earned them 6 months ago after exemplary service in Afghanistan. At 24, she was young for an E5, but combat had a way of accelerating things. Behind her, a platoon of new recruits struggled through an obstacle course, their breath forming white clouds in the November air. Sarah watched with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen real bullets, real consequences. Among the recruits was Private Emma Walsh, 19, fresh from basic training, and clearly struggling with the confidence required for military service. "Walsh," Sarah called out, "your form is off on the wall climb. Use your legs, not just your arms." Emma adjusted, made it over the wall, and collapsed on the other side, gasping. Sarah walked over, offering a hand to pull her up. "You're stronger than you think," Sarah said. "Trust yourself." Emma looked at her sergeant with something close to awe. Everyone knew who Sergeant Martinez was. The woman who'd broken a sergeant's wrists. The woman who'd changed military policy. The woman who deployed to Afghanistan and led her squad through 12 months of combat operations without losing a single soldier. That deployment had been Sarah's crucible, Helmand Province, where the Taliban still fought fiercely despite official declarations of withdrawal. Sarah's squad had conducted over 40 patrol missions, survived 3 IED attacks, and engaged in numerous firefights. She'd earned a Bronze Star for valor after pulling 2 wounded soldiers from a disabled Humvee while under heavy fire. The citation had read, "Sergeant Martinez's decisive leadership and selfless courage under fire exemplify the highest traditions of military service." But Sarah rarely talked about Afghanistan. The weight of those 12 months lived in her eyes, a quiet hardness that hadn't been there before. She'd seen friends wounded, held dying Afghan children caught in crossfire, made split-second decisions that saved lives and haunted dreams. Combat changed you. It made everything else seem smaller, including a confrontation on a parade ground 2 years ago. That afternoon, Sarah sat in her small office reviewing performance reports when Captain Morrison knocked on her open door. He'd been promoted since their Fort Benning days, now serving as Fort Campbell's Equal Opportunity Advisor, a position he'd specifically requested. "Sergeant Martinez, got a minute?" Sarah gestured to the chair. Morrison looked different than she remembered, older, grayer, but with a sense of purpose he'd lacked before. "I wanted to show you something," Morrison said, pulling out a tablet. He displayed a graph showing harassment reporting rates across the Army. "This is what your case did. Reporting is up 187% Army-wide. More importantly, substantiation rates, cases that result in action, are up 240%. Soldiers are reporting because they finally believe they'll be heard." Sarah studied the numbers. Behind each data point was a soldier like her, like Jessica Torres, like Rachel Kim, someone who'd found the courage to speak up. "The Martinez protocols are now standard across all duty branches," Morrison continued. "Direct reporting hotlines, independent investigations, quarterly audits. We're teaching your case at West Point at all the service academies. You changed everything." "We changed everything," Sarah corrected. "You, Major Chen, all those women who came forward, I just broke some bones." Morrison smiled sadly. "You did more than that. You showed that the system could work if we forced it to work." He paused. "I know I failed you at Fort Benning. I let procedure and politics matter more than doing what was right. I've spent 2 years trying to make up for that." Sarah met his eyes. She'd been angry at Morrison once, furious at his inaction. But Afghanistan had taught her about the weight of impossible decisions, about how good people could fail under broken systems. "You're doing the work now," she said simply. "That counts." At Fort Leavenworth, Derek Rawlins served his sentence in bitter silence. His early release petition had been denied after investigators discovered He'd attempted to intimidate witnesses from prison through intermediaries. Additional charges added 6 months to his sentence. His wrists had healed poorly despite multiple surgeries. He'd never regained full range of motion. The doctors said the breaks had been too precise, too complete. Sometimes, lying in his cell, Rawlins replayed that moment. The certainty he'd felt raising his hand to strike Martinez a second time, the shock when her counter came faster than thought, the sound of his own bones breaking. He'd spent 15 years believing women didn't belong in combat, that they were weak, that they needed to know their place. Sarah Martinez had taught him about places. His was here, behind bars, forgotten by an army that had moved on without him. On a crisp December evening, Fort Campbell hosted a ceremony honoring service members who demonstrated exceptional courage in advocating for justice and reform. Sarah stood among a dozen other soldiers being recognized, her dress uniform perfect, her bearing proud. The base commander, Brigadier General Patricia Hayes, the same colonel who'd witnessed the parade ground incident and testified at Sarah's court-martial, personally presented each award. When Sarah's name was called, Hayes smiled warmly. Sergeant Martinez's actions 2 years ago sparked institutional change across our entire military. Her courage under fire, both on the parade ground and in Afghanistan, exemplifies the warriors we need leading our army. The applause was thunderous. After the ceremony, as guests mingled over refreshments, a young private approached Sarah nervously. She was 18, maybe 19, with uncertain eyes and fidgeting hands. "Sergeant Martinez, I'm Private Olivia Chen. I need to ask you something." Sarah recognized that look, fear mixed with determination. "Go ahead, Private." That day on the parade ground, Olivia's voice dropped to a whisper. "When Rawlins slapped you, were you scared?" Sarah thought about lying, about projecting invincibility. But she remembered being 19, remembered needing truth more than perfection. "Terrified," Sarah admitted. "My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding. I thought my career was over before it really started." "But you still did it, you still stood up." "Being scared doesn't mean you don't act, Private. It means you act anyway. Fear is just information. It tells you something matters. What matters is what you do with that fear." Olivia nodded slowly, her eyes clearing. "My squad leader has been saying things, making me uncomfortable. I've been afraid to report it because—" she trailed off. "Because you're scared of the consequences," Sarah finished gently. "I understand, but here's what I learned. The consequences of silence are worse than the consequences of speaking. Report it. Use the hotline. And if you need someone to walk with you to CID, I'll do it." Tears filled Olivia's eyes. "Thank you, Sergeant." As the young private walked away with straighter shoulders, Sarah felt something shift inside her. This was why the parade ground had mattered. Not for her, not for revenge, not even for justice, though justice mattered. It was for every Olivia, every soldier who'd come after, every person who needed to know that standing up was possible. That evening, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, looking at the framed photograph on her desk. Her squad in Afghanistan, all of them alive, all of them home. Beside it sat her bronze star and the certificate from the parade ground ceremony 2 years ago, the one she dropped when Rawlins struck her. Her phone buzzed. A text from her father saw the ceremony online. "Your abuela would be so proud. I know I am. Te amo, mija." Sarah smiled, typing back, "Love you too, Dad." She stood and walked to her window, looking out over Fort Campbell's lights. Somewhere out there, Olivia was probably working up the courage to make that report. Somewhere, another soldier was watching videos of the parade ground incident, learning that self-defense wasn't insubordination. Somewhere, the system was working a little better because people had refused to accept broken. A recruit passed below her window and called up, "Evening, Sergeant Martinez." "Evening, Private, stay sharp." Sarah Martinez had learned her place over 2 hard years of service, combat, and growth. Her place was standing tall. Her place was leading others. Her place was showing every soldier who came after that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was acting despite it. Her place was exactly where she stood, and she'd never let anyone tell her different again. The end.